Hello and welcome to the Innovation Summit of 2017. My name is Saadi and I'm here with Craig from ARC.
How you doing today, Saadi?
All right, thank you so much for being here with me, Craig. So today we're just going to talk informally about what you're seeing as you attend all these different conferences from multiple companies. What's the major trends that you see as consistent? And then let's see where we go from there. How about that?
Sounds perfect. You know, certainly anything to do with IoT, big data, analytics, and moving forward with no longer is everything, all data having to run through a control system. At this point now, are we collecting data at the edge? Are we collecting data and now sending it directly to a cloud, such as a Microsoft Azure, which we know Schneider Electric has a strong partnership with Microsoft for that.
Yes.
So it's really kind of moving from looking at things from just the factory floor and measuring things on and off, pressures, temperatures, levels, and flows, and now looking at the business value. So still making those very, very important control measurements and control decisions, but at the same time, putting involved the business decisions, things that would go to the MES systems, for example, and now making business decisions and control decisions based on that information as well. And that's something that we're seeing pretty much across the board.
That's good. That's good. And I think, that is really spot on with what customers are asking us. As we heard from this morning's keynote session or opening general session, there was that acknowledgement that customers are hearing in the market these buzzwords, these technologies, and they're looking for guidance on how to make use of it all because they don't want to miss out on the one hand. On the other hand, because we are in an industry that depends on stability and some continuity and robustness of product, of course, in adherence to the strict laws and requirements that we have on us as unique in our industry, unlike consumers, they are looking for that guidance on how to make use of it all.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. The one thing that the users are really looking for is, in this industry, you can't so much as spend $20 for a photoelectric sensor without doing a return on investment calculation. So one of the things that the users seek is to try to find out ways of measuring the returns of some of these new technologies. There's always this fear of kind of taking that first step and saying, I'd like to move to applications that leverage IoT, for example, but I'm a little bit hesitant because I don't want to make an investment where I will not be able to prove a return. So one of the things that we are always looking for at ARC Advisory Group is to speak to customers who have been, say, early adopters of the technology and have been able to make measurements of these new investments and be able to come up with case studies that say, yes, we have made this investment, and we're not looking for full-blown, soup to nuts, completely adding all this technology to the plant at the same time. But usually what we call is the low-hanging fruit application, where maybe there's a problem with an application where you're having continuous unplanned or unscheduled downtime. And that's sometimes the areas to focus on because you're almost guaranteed to get that return on investment just by purely being able to minimize or eliminate unscheduled downtime.
Right. That's a fantastic point. And in fact, you brought up a couple of cool things there. One was being able to try something and show the value. Being able to cite a use case that somebody else has done it and achieved something. Being able to test something that is real. And I think, consistent with that theme of how the costs are coming down to try something, so it's not very expensive, therefore the ROI is easier and faster to justify. I mean, at least to prove out the value, right? The second thing is they are looking to their trusted technology partners, like you pointed out, for what do you have that I can try from you? And really the operative word there is try, right? Under that culture and spirit of innovation and agility, right? To try something to see for myself, how does it all come together end to end? Because one thing we also know is that in the IoT space, there is no single person who can solve everything.
Absolutely.
So it has to be a combination of understanding what each relevant player brings to the table, what value they bring, and then also help the customer understand through our partnerships and with guidance like companies like yourself, how we can bring a sort of the full stack and show that we're complementary and that we're real, that through that culture of innovation you can test something, you can sign up for it, you can do it, and then see for yourself where you can take it. without having that risk associated with a huge, long, drawn-out project that requires that huge upfront capital investment. And then I'll add one other thing, which is cybersecurity. That's a key topic that everyone is worried about. But that's why I'm really happy to talk about stuff that we're doing at Schneider Electric, where we're demonstrating that cybersecurity is really at the core of everything we do. It's built natively into how we're reframing our offerings in that IoT or digital transformation context, right? It's built natively into those capabilities. And then through our own partnerships, we're solving that cybersecurity, what I like to call that chain of trust, right? Down from that trusted sensor, connected devices collectively to that edge control that you talked about, how it's appropriate to have some things on-prem for that high availability, low latency, but then have that value-added set of capabilities that you can only get from high-performance computing, like the machine learning, like the cognitive services, like the AI, that we add to our value-added software, apps, and services.
Well, the reason that you bring up the point of cybersecurity and why it's critical is, believe it or not, there are still times we'll talk to users who are, let's say, a little bit behind the curve when it comes to automation.
Sure.
They may still be having some manual processes where they're walking around the plants with clipboards and recording data. And sometimes when we ask them about automating a process and having that process become connected, they bring up the cybersecurity concern and they say, listen, you can't hack what's not connected. And one of the things that we like to bring up when we work with these customers is first of all, companies like Schneider Electric, because of their partnerships, they recognize that there are companies in this world that have cybersecurity expertise because that is the business that they're in, or certainly as you partner with companies like Microsoft, obviously it affects their business across all the vertical industries in which they serve. But to go back and say you're not connected, I think will send the plant to a position where no longer can they be, I won't even say, never mind can they not be globally competitive, they can't even be locally competitive.
Right.
So I think you have to make the adoption to connect to connect all your assets, to be able to collect that data, run the necessary analytics. So not only are you making better business decisions, but now you're able to store that data to the point where you can leverage artificial intelligence and make the best decisions going forward based on history. At one time companies would buy a historian, as you certainly know,
right,
and they might have 20 years worth of data in the historian. And sometimes we ask them, well, what are you doing with that data in the historian? And they'll say, well, we haven't had to go back because we always save it in case we have a problem.
Yeah, they'll say, we back it up.
Exactly.
That's great, but so what?
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
the issue is why are you collecting all this data if you're not being able to leverage it to make better decisions going forward?
Right.
So from our perspective, most companies will complain to us we're drowning in data. We have too much of it. So one of the things that we're trying to advise them is what can you do strategically with that data to make it a huge asset for the business? And I know a lot of times you'll hear the quote that data is the new oil. Well, in some cases, the data is worth more than the product that you're actually manufacturing.
Correct. Yes, exactly. And companies have to learn how to leverage that information to deliver a new offering, maybe a new revenue model, right? To capitalize on that information in a way that helps them, like to your point, compete in this day and age. I mean, how could you not be connected and claim that you are still on a path to being competitive, to being relevant, right? And to being differentiated within your market, because everyone around you is going to move in that direction, whether you like it or not. This is one of those things where if you don't react to these environmental changing conditions, that in itself is a decision. I mean, that in itself is a statement. And I would further add that coming back to the cybersecurity thing, I would almost argue that you have to be connected to be secure. Need I remind the audience that some of the major recent cybersecurity exploits that happened was because some systems were not patched. Mm-hmm. So that ability to stay constantly updated, to stay constantly patched, that can only happen when you are continuously connected. And I would challenge customers respectfully that if they say that they're not connected, is that really true? because there's just too many exceptions. I think within the industry, we've had just so much explanation and thought and articles written to prove that, that kind of idea that you can be completely isolated and protected is really the safer route. I don't think it is. And I think all companies have to look at the cloud not as a threat vector, but really as part of a larger evaluation of the company's corporate risk. Because when you put it into that framework, then you recognize that on-prem business has a cost and a risk. Being in the cloud has a cost and a risk. But if you evaluate it with a level, rational mind, you can see that there are specific mitigations that companies like ourselves are taking to address those issues. And because to your earlier point, our reputation is, we live and die on our ability to keep our customers' data safe, we can often exceed the capabilities or the skill sets or the resources dedicated to making sure that we do our part.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the other reasons why at ARC we're very, very strong advocates of companies going forward with IT and OT convergence.
Right.
Because in many cases, each of them have a very, very strong skill set. OT understands real time and making measurements in milliseconds sometimes. IT, though, is typically a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to issues of understanding cybersecurity and understanding how the cloud can actually benefit an organization. And sometimes what happens is once you go through the fact and say, where do you think your 401k and your data is? It's in the cloud.
Or your payroll.
Right. When you go to the ATM machine, where do you think your financial information is being stored?
Right.
And so ultimately, even though certainly we understand that the level and importance of security in manufacturing, but industries such as the financial industry, financial services, have been living this whole issue of cybersecurity for many, many years, as they've probably been a little bit further ahead of the curve in deploying technology, IT technology, than manufacturing. So why not benefit from a lot of that experience that they have with cloud and cybersecurity, and then working together with OT who understand how to manufacture products, the fact that processes can never fail, can never go down, and really kind of working together, you get the best of all worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you seeing in terms of customers' hesitancy and sort of taking it beyond just adopting cloud as a deployment model to help accelerate their capabilities? Have you encountered customers that are already one step ahead thinking about the multi-cloud verse scenario? Because I think, I've seen some of our partners start to say that, you have a set of cloud offerings, but I can take my customers and I can bring their data to your cloud, but I can also bring it to other cloud service providers. So there's kind of a mixing and matching that's happening. Are you seeing that?
We see a mixing and matching, and really where we see the most mixing and matching is with private cloud and public cloud. For example, sometimes the plants think that the historian data is critical, but if they can't access it right away, it isn't going to have a negative impact on their process.
Right.
So if they see that, sending it off to a public cloud, is the right, based on their staffing, based on the financial proposition, they're more apt to say, okay, we'll put the historian data in the public cloud. But maybe there's data regarding their own processes, their own formulas, their own control, that they feel safer knowing the fact that they are controlling the server, whether or not the server is under their roof, within their facility, or maybe at another facility owned by the company. So sometimes they'll take a private cloud approach to that data. So what we look at is this is like a kind of a hybrid situation for most of these companies when it comes to the cloud. The other thing we find as the cloud is concerned is there's also applications where people feel safer having the data at the device level, as we might call it, at the edge. So we're finding hybrid situations where some people say, let's keep that control data at the edge. Let's maybe put MES data into the private cloud, and let's maybe put historian data into a public cloud. Now, obviously, I'm generalizing, but we're finding that companies that are moving forward and being progressive typically don't have one absolute strategy. It's really kind of a hybrid blend of them all.
Right, and I think that is absolutely something that is unique to our industry as well is that expectation that of course it has to exist as a hybrid deployment, because inherently there are things that are going to be on-prem within our industry. So you're certainly right in the acknowledgement that it doesn't have to be all or nothing or black and white solution. It's almost like cooking in the kitchen. You take ingredients where I need some on-prem, I need some public cloud, I need some maybe for some higher level stringent data, I need some private cloud capabilities, and mix it together to cook up the solution that you need that helps you move forward. And like I said, get back to those core tenets of being differentiated, competitive, and relevant in today's world, certainly.
Oh yeah, and another thing that we find that's really, really critical is, we do have this, crisis of experience in the respect that as the baby boomers retire, many times the database is in the head of the person who's
that
retiring.
Tribal knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they sometimes know, if they have a crowbar, where to hit the valve when the valve sticks.
Right.
But when that person is replaced by a millennial, the millennial is not going to understand that where to hit the valve with a crowbar to when it's stuck. They're going to depend on having that valve be a smart valve and provide intelligence and being able to let them know when there's going to be a problem, let's say, with a bearing in the valve and when the valve is going to need to be repaired. So you can no longer depend on that inherent level of the 30-year employee that knows every aspect of the plant, everything stored here, not documented anywhere. So it's so important if you want to, as the people are beginning to retire and being replaced by millennials, that you're able to capture a lot of that knowledge to help the millennial. The other thing is, for a millennial to be interested in pursuing a career in manufacturing, they're comfortable with tablets, they're comfortable with smartphones, they're comfortable with gaming technologies, they're comfortable with augmented reality and virtual reality. So if you can bring those technologies to manufacturing, all of a sudden becoming a manufacturer on the factory, a job in manufacturing on the factory floor is no longer considered something that would be unattractive. Now you're in a situation where you're going to be extremely attractive because you're able to use a lot of the technologies that you're comfortable with, that you're very familiar with, and use them in a practical application to help achieve success and operational excellence at the plant.
Yeah, so can you imagine that, using this moment in time, this digital transformation period, as a way to solve the challenges of talent acquisition and retention? That being able to have a millennial come into your workplace and say, what's my job, where's my app? Because that's essentially what it boils down to, right? They don't need that necessarily fixed office location anymore. They don't need necessarily all the same productivity tools that we're so used to sort of, in a template-driven way, just giving to them. They already have a lot of that stuff themselves. So all they really need to know is, what's my role, which, by the way, I probably won't do for more than 2 years, because that's another attribute, isn't it, of the younger generation, is they want to try different things. And where's the app that's going to help guide me onto what I need to pay attention to at a personalized level, mind you, right? So that I can quickly do my job and benefit from the systemic knowledge that we're now building increasingly into our systems. So I guess we can climb that maturity curve of not only being able to interact with the systems to control and visualize and monitor, but also leverage the system to help guide us on what is about to happen, what is likely to happen, what is the next recommended action that I take, right? So we become more orchestrators of this technology than we do really, just sort of the manual interactors with it.
Yeah, there's no question that any manufacturing facility today, if they're not moving forward with the digital transformation, so not only is it going to hurt their top line in sales because the products aren't going to be to the level of quality and consistency, they're not going to be able to be made in as a productive fashion as possible, so it's certainly going to have a negative impact on the bottom line. And in many cases, the customers want to do business with companies that have these technologies. So whether or not it's a consumer product and from a publicity perspective, or it's an industrial product, or even something that might be leveraged, let's say, as you're putting technology on infrastructure, services like smart cities and roads and trains, for example. It's imperative to move forward that that the digital transformation is begun and that these companies are able to successfully deploy it. But the one thing we tell these companies, because there's always this fear that they're going to have to do a complete rip and replace. Take all 30, 40, 50 years of assets out simultaneously, have to come up with some incredibly large CapEx budget that's going to have to get approved and go through a justification process. So one of the things that we say is, again, go for the low-hanging fruit. And one of the things that certainly Schneider Electric has done a great job is to create products and starting to sell products as a service. So now, instead of having to pay things out of the CapEx side of the budget, it may now be a monthly expense that might be on the OpEx side of the budget. Right. And maybe one of the things you could do is let some of the people know what are some of the things that have moved to as a service. So people no longer have to necessarily spend a lot of money up front, but now can do it on a monthly basis and do it in a more aggravation and worry-free fashion, because they may not have the help to have to provide the support for the product. And as you're selling a product as a service, often the patches, for example, the upgrades are being made for them and they don't even know it. Just like how when you automatically on your smartphone have a new app and that you just have to upgrade to the press a button and the app is upgraded automatically. Right. And so that's almost like, the platform as a service.
Right, absolutely. I think from my point of view, as someone that's been down this journey for 5+ years actually, simplicity is really key, right? And we talk about this a lot, the frictionless experience, the self-serve experience. Even in other markets, such as the business intelligence markets, we use that term a lot, right? Self-serve, even sort of on a broader level, when you look at how kids are getting educated these days, it's a lot of self-directed learning, right? So making it super easy for customers to get started with whatever their objective is, whether it's from basic command and control capabilities to more advanced information management type capabilities, or whether it's into that MES type capabilities where you're really just trying to figure out, how do I take what I have, like you said, and find something, a partner that has something tangible that I can sign up with for a low cost on an annual basis that allows me to start now, start incrementally, but start, right? Exactly. Start with confidence and start also from the point of where I am, not necessarily where others expect me to be or where technology is telling me I should be, right? But to start with the investments that I have, the software that I have. And this is really critical, is customers want to be able to say that, I'm already used to using a set number of products or set number of assets. I just want to be able to do that plus one thing that's different, that brings me all of these benefits, so that I can be a participant in this transformation without literally having to transform everything in some huge exercise that would be difficult to justify or explain or even assess from a risk standpoint.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it's important, and I know Schneider Electric does this, is rather than selling product, you're selling solution.
That's right.
Because in many cases, when people will say, the customers get afraid that they're going to come at me and I'm going to have to upgrade all my PLCs and my PACs and my DCS systems. I'm going to have to upgrade all my instrumentation simultaneously if I want to become, and have this digital transformation. And one of the things that we say is, this is an evolution, not a revolution. Focus in on the areas, and companies like Schneider Electric will develop a blueprint that's exactly customized to what that plant needs. And there's no two plants, even if, for example, you have one company that has 30 plants around the world, there's not even a template for all 30 plants, because every plant has their own nuances. They have multiple generations of automation equipment. They may have differences in their processes. So therefore, you want to be in a position that you're giving someone a I would say the word customized solution. not customize,
Right.
customerize exactly for their needs. And also now you get to take into account their ability to how risk adverse they are, what their budget situations are like. Maybe there's a situation where they can say that if we can justify this one application, then we can move on to application 2 and application 3. So it's really a matter of just trying to pull all this together, and give them something that fits their risk, their ability to absorb risk,
Their appetite.
and their
Yeah.
appetite and their budget.
Right. Exactly to your point, customers are looking for outcomes, right? So I would say in the past, although it's not so long ago, but in the past, most companies sold software products that were advertised for their features because the understanding was customers could take that and then turn it into a benefit or an outcome. But because now with the technologies, the set of technologies that are coming with digital transformation, it means that partners and vendors can abstract more of that burden away and deliver back that set of outcomes and capabilities more, so that customers suddenly don't have to preoccupy themselves with that minutia of specifically what product or what feature made it happen. Rather, they are able to consume that capability, like you described, get right to the point, right, which is that outcome, see the benefit, build on that, and then expand based on their new leveraged position, right, based on these capabilities. That is absolutely key, for sure.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's really gone a long way is, at one time, and it wasn't too many years ago, that if someone suggested using a smartphone or a tablet made by a consumer products company on the factory floor, companies would have laughed and said we would worry about, is their ability to deal with shock and vibration and intrinsic safety.
Right.
Now what they're saying is, not every application is that the case. So do we want to spend $5,000 or $10,000 for an industrial handheld that when the environment and the application really doesn't suit? Or can we accept maybe a $700 or $800 tablet, for example, that'll do the job, and in the worst case scenario that the tablet gets smashed, now it can be replaced for $700 or $800 and not $5,000 or $10,000. And the other thing it does is it gives you consumer type of product life cycles. Sometimes when we talk in manufacturing, especially when we have these discussions when IT and OT convergence.
Yes.
Sometimes we look at it in human years and dog years. Because, for example, a 4-year-old dog may be equivalent to a 28-year-old person.
Sure.
And in many cases, that life cycle in IT and OT can be similar, where a 4-year-old product in IT is equivalent to a 28-year-old product in
That's
OT.
interesting. Yeah.
And one of the things that we're able to do now is to be able to, if we can now start using more consumer-level products in the factory floor, no longer are they going to have to amortize that high-expense product for 28 years. Now, when the product is 4 years old, they can replace it with the latest technology.
Yeah. And just listening to you, two things come to mind. One is that recognition that in the consumer space, things are evolving really quickly, and it's usually the precursor from our point of view in industry to see what's possible, right, out there in the world, being tested in the consumer context. And I think the trick is, and especially I'm proud to say that this is our perspective, is we take that simplicity, that ease of use, that self-serve kind of experience from the consumer world, which are all the benefits, but marry that with the higher cybersecurity requirements that we need from an industrial point of view, that protection of intellectual property, that explicit recognition of where the safety of personnel come into play, right? What is appropriate to be on-prem or hosted in the cloud? Where's that hybrid balance that we spoke of earlier, right? So being able to do that sweet spot, and of course regulatory compliance was the other one, I think that's really where companies like us can sort of help consumers, or I should say our customers, benefit from both sides of that equation. And then the one other thing that comes to mind as you were talking is, customers also are really looking just to, like I said, advance themselves quicker without the complexity that used to be associated to the management, maintenance, monitoring, setup, high availability, redundancy, all that patching. All of that created a layer that not all of our customers had the skills and competencies to do, or they had the resources or infrastructure to support that. So now suddenly, what I like to say is, part of what we're doing is democratizing a set of business capabilities
Right.
to a larger base of people that previously were shut out from that, right? So that's another great kind of advantage.
Yeah, the other thing that it really also does, to your point, is, sometimes we have a saying at ARC is that when people want connectivity, it's really from, say, breaker to boardroom. It isn't just purely just from the, say, control systems or from the instrumentation on up. It involves their building automation. It involves their facility controls. It involves their security systems. So the idea is you have to have, essentially these items all have to have IP addresses and all be enabled. And some people say, what's the advantage of having a smart breaker, for example? But the idea is if you can now, again, from a diagnosis perspective, from a maintenance perspective, you're now truly connecting all elements of the plant. And now the breaker is able to send communication to the control system because you may be in a position where you're making control decisions based on the status of kind of, I would say, is the lowest common denominator.
Right,
and
right.
Because if you have a failure of the $20 product, line still goes down. You can spend $10 million to completely do a full rip and replace, full-blown upgrade of a line. But on the lowest common denominator, if those devices fail, there is still downtime. So the idea is, and it's one of the things that certainly with the portfolio of all of Schneider Electric and having in an EcoStruxure IoT platform, you have the ability to go from data centers, IT, building automation, facility automation, all the way into industrial controls.
Yeah, I've certainly seen that with our customers is that once you get past that initial resistance, and that framing of cloud versus no cloud, right, as we've been discussing, once our customers start putting stuff into the cloud, the real inspirational moment is when they start thinking to themselves, now, what else can I do? And then I'll tell you another flip side to that is equally interesting is we're sitting here with our customers' data that we are so humbled and honored to curate on their behalf, and it's always their data, but we're asking ourselves as a technology partner, a trusted advisor, what else can we do on behalf of our customers now that they're sharing their data with us? What kind of analysis can we do proactively for them? What else can we connect them to? And you'll see that multiplier effect, once you get past that initial inertia, if you will, right? What else can you do? What else can we do together? That is truly where I've seen some of the greatest happy faces, I'll say.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you tell them that story, it gives them a sense of relief because, believe it or not, in the marketplace, there's always some customers have said to us, are we afraid, for example, that if our customers, if our suppliers such as Schneider Electric are curating our data, does that mean they own the data? And one of the things that we assure them is the fact that no, it'll always be your data. How you're leveraging Schneider Electric is to put together the right software and analytics tools to make sure that you're maximizing the value of that data. And I think that's a message that really needs to get out to the manufacturers and OEMs globally, because there's not a universal understanding of that. There's sometimes this fear that if we don't own the data, and that sometimes gets into even that private cloud, public cloud
Sure.
argument, is that we can never share our data outside of a cloud in which we completely own, because if it's in a public cloud, for example, would AWS or Azure, would they share that data with anybody else, maybe for their own profit?
Right.
And one of the things that we're very, very, very insistent upon is that's their data. That data has the same level of privacy and cybersecurity, and is guarded with the same diligence that they are guarding their own data.
Yeah. I've thought about this topic a lot because it is so important. And, we talk about one of the enablers to cloud is as gaining trust. And, to stay on topic, I'll express it as gaining our customers' digital trust. And if you think about the major foundational tenets of trust, it really comes down to transparency, right? Open communication, having a clear set of expectations and boundaries, knowing where you stand, knowing what you can influence versus what you can't. I mean, if you think about purely from a control standpoint, I get into my car, I don't have control over how that car was built. I eat, of course, like we all do. And when I eat, I don't know necessarily how that piece of food arrived in that nicely saran package. But why do I do it? It's because I feel like there are companies behind that I can trust because of their marketing, their communication, their transparency, their brand reputation, which, by the way, to your earlier point, we have to live and die on our promise to maintain that digital trust, right? And also because we make available resources for customers to look into what is it exactly that we do to protect their data.
Right.
And by the way, we're not alone. We're not operating in a vacuum, right? So we are also held to certain standards within the larger community, and we are a member, an active participant, voting member in some cases, of some of these emerging standards that are helping keep everyone within that structured way of behaving so that we can continue to engender that trust so that companies feel like just because I'm giving up this control, it doesn't mean that I'm giving up the accountability of that data, and recognizing that in the end, coming back to trust and cybersecurity, it is a shared responsibility. I like to say that if it's no one's problem, if it's no one's job, it's everyone's problem. I like to say that, right? So we definitely have to recognize that customers have their own due diligence that they have to do. It's the equivalent of putting your password on a sticky note on your monitor. That's a no-no, right? So there's a kind of a new normal that customers have to be conscious of from a cybersecurity standpoint that they have to do. But we're doing our part, and we're happy to share with our customers openly how we're protecting their data, what standards we're participating in that are not only relevant to the larger space, but relevant to industrial automation. I think customers don't understand or may not be aware that there's a lot of activity from various standards bodies and organizations that are really targeted to industrial automation. And I think that's really important because it's directly related to what we do.
Right, and one of the things that's important for Schneider Electric to convey to its customers is how committed you are to the use of open standards, recognizing the fact that these plants are a multi-vendor ecosystem.
Sure.
And that the only way for these systems to properly communicate with each other is to all subscribe to open standards. Sometimes the manufacturers and OEMs will come back to us and say, there's no such thing as open. They'll use the term proprietary open, which means that the standards are open as long as you adapt to the supplier's own unique communication standards.
Sure.
And one of the things that we say is whether we're talking about OPC UA, whether we're talking about MQTT, whether we're talking about Ethernet IP and the other ODVA technologies, that the companies such as Schneider Electric are already subscribing to those and encourage those. And even if it were to mean that by being more open could possibly open up some applications to companies that may compete with them in different spaces, they know far well that if they were not open, that their prognosis going forward would not be good because they'd have no opportunity to get future business because the users know that these companies have to sell product that work in an ecosystem. I mean, can you imagine if when you're in the United States and you're looking for a 120 volt outlet, if you had to have 5 or 6 different adapters to plug something into the wall?
Yes, yeah.
And you subscribe to electrical open standards, and we've done that for almost a century.
Right.
So now you're at a point where it's the same thing with communication standards. So the ability is that making sure you're selling systems that not only can connect to other assets, but what it also does is it extends the life cycle of those products because that connection will not become obsolete.
Absolutely. And another thing that adhering to an open technology stack and being an active participant to these standards that are relevant to our industry is that it also helps to be able to withstand the scrutiny that these bodies and these technologies basically go through because of the millions of people that depend on that every single day. So essentially, those technologies get beaten up enough to really stand the test of time, go through the loads that in people in our industry and for the use cases that we have can impose onto them, and so that gives an underlying current of, I think, confidence that again reinforces why it is acceptable within that risk envelope
Right.
that we talked about to go ahead and try these technologies. So yeah, I think that it's absolutely hugely important.
Yeah, and that gives the companies the confidence that they can go forward and try, and get over that kind of that making the first step. And sometimes we find that first step is actually kind of if you can get over that hurdle,
Right.
and have them again, as I said earlier, going after that low-hanging fruit and making the plunge and seeing by having that process connected and controlled and actually being able to see the business benefits, the financial benefits, the benefits to the product, the benefits to some of their KPIs, such as increases in overall equipment effectiveness or OEE. And then they see that, and then they come back sometimes to us at ARC and go, why didn't you tell us that 5 years ago? And we'll say, we've been telling you this 5 years ago and before,
Sure.
but you were always, again, it's being risk adverse and being afraid to make the wrong decision in the plant. I can't tell you how many users have said to us that I get rewarded by doing nothing, but I get penalized by doing something if it fails.
Yes.
If I do something and it succeeds, I get slightly rewarded, but if I do something and it fails, I get severely penalized. Sometimes even they'll
Right.
joke that it could be a career-ending move.
Right.
And that's the reason why we say we're not looking for you to do something that is going to be overtly risky. We're going to help you along with the process. Let's again solve it piece by piece, and let's show the return, and then you'll say, why? Let's do it to the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. And then all of a sudden, these companies put together a 5-year plan, and they've purely made the full digital transformation.
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll just pick up on that last comment that you made. I've had customers where they sign up to an offering that we have, that is that self-service, information-rich, advanced analytics cloud service that we have. They'll sign up for it, we'll walk them through it, they're collecting data, they're getting the benefits of the analysis, they're sharing it, and the conclusion, happily and somewhat incidentally, is, oops, I digitally transformed. Because it was so simple, and it wasn't this big thing that they had to overcome. They were able to take those incremental steps based on what their existing situation was, tackle those low-hanging fruit, show the value. And furthermore, I am also amused by, remember how in our industry we had a huge push from a technology standpoint from HMI SCADA command and control, and then somehow we skipped MES, and then we did this huge thing on ERP systems, and then the two levels tried to come down and meet in the middle, and MES always suffered from interoperability challenges. I mean, one of the things that cloud and internet is solving is that integration, that interoperability aspect. And what you're starting to see is that as we become digitally native, as we digitally transform, eventually that touch point becomes a set of APIs, an endpoint, not a perimeter, right, but an endpoint, and that endpoint is based on REST APIs, and everything talks REST APIs, and that's why once you get past that first hurdle and you get some stuff in the cloud, that follow-up question of what else can I do? What's next? What else is possible? Without putting my entire career on the line, right? I think that's the most exciting time. And as we heard from some of our speakers this morning in the general session, it's not just technology. You do have to have a culture where it's acceptable to experiment, where the employee doesn't feel like, wow, if I do this one thing, it's a career-ending move.
Exactly.
Rather, it's okay to fail. And in the spirit of agile, if for those of you who are familiar with that term, fail fast, recover fast,
Right.
iterate, get better, get up, try the next thing, right? That's what really leads to the kind of breakthrough. Fantastic stuff.
It's funny. We've had cases in plants where people will say, I won't use the cloud, for example. And then we'll say, okay, but what if we were to locate a server off-site in another facility, and that way if there was ever a disaster in your facility, an explosion or something that could wipe out the servers on premise, that now that product would be, that information would be backed up on another site, and it would be safe. And they'll say, that sounds great. Now, that's a cloud solution.
Yeah.
But sometimes they can't use the word cloud because it scares them. So sometimes
right,
we'll talk about fail-safe, redundant backup, and then they do it and they say, oh, by the way, I'm going to tell you a little secret. You are now deploying a cloud solution. And they'll say, I am not. And I'll go, that's a cloud solution.
Yes.
So sometimes you've kind of gotten over the hurdle where there's sometimes a fear of the buzzword because there's this perception that this won't work in our plant, it's not secure. So therefore, it's just a way sometimes of trying to word it. So again, instead of saying, I'm going to sell you a cloud solution, what you're really telling them is, I'm going to sell you a redundant, fault-tolerant data backup solution.
That's ingenious, yeah. I actually had an anecdotal story that I'd love to share with you. I had a sales guy come back to me saying he got pushed back on some of the cloud. And I said, you know what? Why don't you go do the cloud taste test? And he says, what does that mean? And I said, go to the executive decision maker and just put a chart on the table that says option A is on-prem, perpetual licensing, high CapEx costs, burden to manage, monitor, maintain is on you, the patching, the upgrading, the cybersecurity, the high availability, the redundancy, the firewall configurations, and all of that is on you, and here's the cost. Or you could sign up and pay this low-cost annual fee and get non-disruptive, continuous updates over time. Which do you prefer? And invariably, the decision maker will say, I want that second option.
Right.
It just seems easier. It
Exactly.
seems matched better with my business needs. And then the sales guy can rip the titles right off the top and say,
Right.
you picked the cloud, surprise.
Exactly.
Right? And it's that shock, But it's really funny, though. It is sometimes how you word it. Well said.
And I think sometimes it's even when you're selling, let's say, as you sell software as a service, instead of saying software as a service, oh, we don't do that. We want to just buy it and put it in ourselves. And you say, okay, well, fine. But if you pay this amount of money per month, how do you feel about patches? Oh, I don't like patching. Patching makes me nervous. We'll take care of it for you. What about upgrades? I don't want to deal with that. We'll take care of that for you. And now all of a sudden it becomes, instead of selling the SaaS model, what you're doing is you're selling something that provides business value, and it may truly be a SaaS model, but again, you're not labeling it a SaaS model for them. They're still getting the complete benefit of the solution regardless of how it's labeled. And now the customer feels a sense of comfort, and it's sometimes an easier story for them to go to management and get the appropriate signatures that it takes to get the project kicked off.
Yeah. Another anecdotal story just along that same theme, just because these things are so fun. I read an article about happiness, so bear with me for a second.
Okay.
But the gist of the article was saying every time you have $1 to spend, instead of buying something, buy something that saves you time.
Right.
Because when you buy something that saves you time, that leads to a greater chance of satisfaction that's sort of long-term and staying, as opposed to something that might be, flippant or temporary. So even from a timing perspective, I think this is something that is often undervalued in the context of a cloud, is the ability to get a business capability in really a record time. Almost to the point where, to exaggerate the point, I'll just put a big stop clock right on the customer's desk and say, let's stop talking about it and let's try it. And their ability to quickly get online, start pushing data, start getting the benefits, start getting the analytics, start being able to export that information, integrate them with yet third-party systems or other offerings that we have, that is something that I find really leads to sort of a long-term kind of benefit that, again, is often overlooked by major companies.
Oh yeah, I'll give you another example with that. Again, in 2017, it is still very common for companies to do manual data collection, walking around with a clipboard, writing data down, then going back to sometimes their Windows XP computer on their desk.
Good gosh. Yeah.
And going to an Excel spreadsheet, filling in the data that they've walked around the plant and collected, and saying, here is my MES, for example. Now, what is the chance that something was transcribed wrong? We all make transcription errors. No one is perfect as far as they collect data. Assuming you've even collected the data accurately, now you got to key the data in. I don't know about you, but I certainly make a number of typos and certainly rely very heavily on things like spell check.
Google reminds me
right?
every time. Did you mean?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So what are the odds of having data that is either recorded wrong or entered wrong? Plus, how much time does it take to walk around and look at all these points of measurement, log these in, enter them in? I mean, sometimes people can spend hours and hours, per day or per shift going through this process. And you say, well, what if we do this? What if we replace this with automated data collection? What are the chances now of error on the intake? Essentially zero. What are the odds of error as that data is being loaded into the program? Essentially zero. And now you're going from hours to probably sometimes less than a second to take that enormous amount of manually entered data, do it automatically. So now you've saved time, you've saved accuracy. So sometimes we'll say, well, please tell me the downside of that. And once they install it, then it becomes, how did we live without it for all these years?
Right.
So sometimes, again, is get them in and look at some of these processes that are truly, again, manual data collection, manual data entry, and solve those products first as far as making that journey to automation and digital transformation.
All right, well, thank you, Craig, for having this free chat with me. I think we'll bring it to a close, but always a pleasure seeing you, and always interesting things going on here at the Innovation Conference this year, and hope everyone watching live has found interest in something of personal relevance to them, maybe even taking a personal challenge to see what they can do by adopting a cloud solution so that they can change their impact and that of their company. So with that, thank you, Craig.
Thanks
Saadi.
everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.